Okay, we're live.
Okay, it seems we are live. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to our CyberBRICS webinar dedicated to data governance in the BRICS. My name is Luca Belli. I'm a professor of internet governance and regulation at FGV Law School, and I have the pleasure to head this fantastic CyberBRICS project. So together with the CyberBRICS Research Fellows today and with two distinguished guest speakers, we will have today Sizwe Snail, who is in the board of the information regulator of South Africa, and Claudio Lucena, who is professor at Paraiba University. They will be our guest speakers, and they will help us elucidate the mysteries of data governance in the BRICS countries. We have decided to have this new format for our webinar dedicated to specific themes every month. This month we will discuss some of the most recent highlights in the BRICS countries with regard to data protection and how this connects with digital policies in general, which is of course our main area of work at the CyberBRICS project. I invite you all to check our website, cyberbrics.info, with more information about our research, how do we engage with stakeholders, and what kind of proposals we are going to elaborate in order to help BRICS countries strengthen their cooperation and enhance their digital policies. Of course, as I was mentioning, within the publications section of our website, you will find many of the issues that we will discuss today, many publications, many studies on this. I would like to remind to everyone who is interested both in digital policies in the BRICS, but particularly in data protection, that we also have a very interesting, one of the interactive tools that we have. It's a very interesting one with a comparative analysis of data protection regimes across BRICS countries. This is also, of course, included in the CyberBRICS book that will be released in 2 months. We will have more news about this very, very soon. And now, without further ado, I would like to ask the first of our guest speakers, Sizwe Snail, who is also one of the authors of the prefaces of this book, to provide us a little bit of introductory remarks about the data protection regime in South Africa. We know that South Africa has been implementing many changes over the past year, and especially over the past months. So, Sizwe, welcome to our webinar, and please tell us, how is the data protection regime in South Africa? How is this shaped? I guess we have some technical problem to have Sizwe connecting. Sizwe, can you hear us? Well, as we are, we have the pleasure and honor to have two guest speakers. Well, I propose that while we solve technical issues with Sizwe's connection, we start with our second guest speaker, Claudio Lucena, who recently published a book on COVID-19 global insights, exploring a wide range of personal data issues raised by the ongoing pandemic. So, Claudio, I hope your connection is working well. And so please, first of all, welcome. And secondly, what are the main outcomes of this recent publication you shared that is also, of course, available on our website? And what connects the experiences that various authors of the book analyzed.
Thank you very much, Luca. I hope you're hearing me.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for you all. It's a pleasure to be here finally for a first time in a meeting with the project. This initiative stemmed from a need that we I'm Vice President of the Data Protection Committee in the State Bar in Paraiba State here in Brazil. We're working on the compliance issues that raise in the legal practice from the bar perspective. And with the pandemic, we sensed the need to try to, we hear a lot in the news about different initiatives coming from different countries to try to tackle the COVID problem. So we felt the need to try to map those initiatives, as many as we could, in a single source of research. So our idea was to try to reach out for partners across the world and try to have them deliver short insights. This is not a book that is addressed to regulators only. It's supposed to be to have a wider reach for the civil society also. And I think we managed to put up a nice piece with short descriptions of interesting experiences that happen all over the world. We're happy to have contributions from Luca and Nico Zingales and Smriti. Thank you very much for your response. And I think something that is very clear that it looks like a connecting line across all these experiences, Luca, including in the BRIC countries, which might have a slightly different characteristic connecting them all, is a concern for the basic principles of data protection. It seems that this was a very important moment to mature, to consolidate, and to discuss further and deeper the principles around data protection. Transparency was a major concern in all the initiatives that we were able to map. And something that is also interesting was, I don't know if it happens a lot and in this intensity and in this space, in the regulatory framework, but this was a moment where people were more, let's say, susceptible and open to more trial and error. Many of the initiatives we mapped here came back and forth in a matter of weeks, 15 days, 3 weeks. A decision was made, then it was adjusted, and it was as a prototype. We talk a lot about that for smart regulation when we deal with the digital, but we're maybe never forced to do that in a real life situation. I think data protection needed a stress test all over the world. And unfortunately, it came from a tragedy. But I think it was an interesting moment for us to try to see how smart regulation really behaves in real life situations. And I think this happened across many of the initiatives that we mapped.
You raise a really excellent and fascinating point about smart regulation. And this is something that is very much heard in digital policy circles, especially in the BRICS countries that are trying to upgrade and also to lead in terms of global policy making. So is there something that you feel in your analysis is a common thread or something that particularly connects the BRICS countries' experiences in these terms?
Yeah, there is an important difference between the BRICS. We reached out for a Chinese fellow, but we unfortunately couldn't have one text from a Chinese fellow in the book. From the experiences we have, it is very clear that we lack, let's say, a more substantial contribution at this moment because of the lack exactly of a regulator, of the figure of an authority. I think this is a huge chance that was missed by our jurisdiction in Brazil. Regulators, I'm not going to speak for regulators. Sizwe is here, he's going to speak for regulators. But we all see that it was a huge opportunity that we missed in Brazil. We could have learned and matured years in this 6 months here. Because as I said, data protection for legitimate reasons had to be adjusted. It was the time to test many of the principles that are entrenched in data protection, in the anatomy of the data protection legal framework. And we missed the opportunity of a regulator to understand that, react timely, and maybe frame more quickly the responses for more obvious problems. Apart from that, it seems that South African and Indian regulators, we have fellows here who can further a little bit, try to act on that basis of trial and error, maybe propose the policy, see how it works, and then in this new dynamics that we are starting to get more used to, civil society also acts and responds in a timely way. Then regulators try to adjust it. So I think this was an interesting moment for dialogue. For as much as we could not meet and interact in the way we did before the pandemics, but I think it was an interesting moment, both to consolidate data protection, discuss it further, and also to consolidate this multi-stakeholder participation on a national basis. I think both these are characteristics that I saw in the BRICS inputs we had. We did have that even in Brazil, despite the fact that we do not have a regulator, because we had constitutional challenges concerning data protection and the use of government, and that showed us the possibility of also civil society participation. Not in the environment it should be, though. The environment of the Supreme Court should not be the first resource, and it in fact was the case in Brazil.
So we think that something may have been different if Brazil had a data protection authority, the ANPD, that it is the only element of the new data protection law which is already in force since almost 2 years, although it has never been created so far. So what do you think would have been different if we had a data protection authority?
Yeah, I think, as I said, the opportunity for a data protection we're building an infrastructure and the regulatory environment of data protection. Brazil still has specific regulated sectors. We do not have a general framework of data protection, as you might be aware in the whole project. So there's a difference here in reforming the system and in building it from scratch. Mm-hmm. Aside from the regulated sectors, we can consider that we're building awareness for the general citizen and in non-regulated sectors. In an environment like that, guidelines from regulators are usually very important. And I think it would be a time that a regulator in Brazil, had it been in place, would have both importance, relevant, and the necessary attention from civil society. So I think in many ways, it was the right moment to consolidate the presence of a data protection authority. But it has to come, right? And we can just record that moment in history, keep mourning that nothing happened, or look forward and look how we build it for the future. So I think we have to make this to make have the record that we had a good chance and we missed it, but not we should not panic or mourn for the rest of our lives, and should look forward and see how we learn from that lesson and improve from here.
Indeed. And speaking about regulators, I hope Sizwe now is fully connected. I would like to thank you, Claudio, and of course invite you to provide further inputs during the debate at the end of the webinar. But now let's ask to Sizwe, how is the South African environment? How is the South African, first of all, how is the South African data protection regime shaped? And then we can discuss what have been the latest updates into this regime that either because of COVID or because of other political events happened over the past months. Please, Sizwe, thank you very much for being with us and welcome to our webinar.
Thank you, Prof. Belli. I thought I would just sit down and deal with some of the issues on a slide. It's always nice to see it visually, not just orally in this type of platform. So I thought, let me just discuss shortly from a South African perspective, our response to the fourth industrial revolution. I mean, we have now been forced to deal with the fourth industrial revolution, whether we like to or not. 6 months ago, revolution would like to have. And now the fourth industrial revolution is what we call the new normal. So what have we done in South Africa in terms of legislating, or should I say regulating, that area that pertains to information technology? I myself, I come from an e-commerce background. I found myself in intellectual property at some stage. And over the last 10 years, I was really involved in a lot of cybersecurity and cybercrime efforts, because we were drafting a new cybercrime bill, as you can see on the slide there. In 2015, we had a bill. In 2018, and those were finally passed by Parliament. And you will notice now that the remaining sections of our POPIA, now the POPIA was passed into law in 2013. The Office of the Information Regulator came into force in December 2016, but the President only on the 1st of July 2020 assented to the remainder of our act. In other words, for a whole period of 3 years, we were setting up the office, setting up systems on how complaints will work, and so forth. But on the 1st of July, the President deemed it fit, and I must compliment our President, he deemed it fit to deal with both pieces of legislation that have now become a integral part of our lives, to put it in a short way. If you look at our principles, we follow the principles as set out by the international best practice. There may be one or two principles that's pre-GDPR. That has to do with the time it took us to put in the law into place. But South Africa is a data-friendly place currently, if I may to put it to you like that, Luca.
Sizwe,
then you know,
please go ahead. I wanted to, sorry if I interrupt you, but I know that you have also very recently introduced a 12 months grace period in your system. So this is a very important point, and actually it's key for those who are planning compliance. So pardon me if for the interjection, but I think it would be very interesting for us and for those who are listening to us also to understand a little bit more what is this 12 months grace period.
Okay, I'm very happy to deal with that, and I think even the current slide deals with that, because in the case that you see in front of your screen, this was a 2017 case. January 2017, the regulator had just been established. I, as a part-time member, found myself in the office, and here we were served with court papers. And this was a civil organization that was complaining about the lack of safety and security guards that our Ministry of Social Services had for grant beneficiaries. To cut a long story short, using the same law that was not in force at the time, they managed to convince the Constitutional Court that personal information needs to be protected. So what I'm trying to say to you is the grace period that you are asking me about is from what we would say the 1st of July. I just want to take you to that specific slide. Just going back. If you see here, we said from the 1st of July 2020, a 12-month grace period will be put into force in South Africa. Now, the question I always get from my stakeholders is, so in this 12-month period, do we need to comply? Of course, you need to comply. You need to get with the program, as I put it with my students. You need to start doing privacy impact assessments within that period of 12 months. Within that period of 12 months, it's a period to get your house in order, not a period to get away with murder, but a period to get your house in order. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much for this, Sizwe. And actually, another very important point we also addressed at our first CyberBRICS webinar was the recent spate of data breaches. It's actually interesting almost every country, but was particularly intense in South Africa. So how the information regulator is tackling this increasing amount of data breaches?
Thank you very much, Prof. Belli, for that question. The issue of data breaches and cybersecurity, hence I talk about the intersection of cyber criminality, cybersecurity, and data protection. That has been extensively dealt with in sections 19, sections 20 and 21 and 22 of our Act. For instance, you will see section 19 talks about, if you look on the screen, appropriate, reasonable, technical and organizational steps that a responsible party, you would call it a controller, that a responsible party has to put in effect when processing personal information. You will see, going further, 19.2 deals with some of the factors such as risk identification, establishment of appropriate safety guards, verification and implementation. All of these, in summary, would be a data assessment of the organization. In other words, a data risk assessment. Now, there's two things I want to emphasize on that. If you are processing personal information for someone else, then you are bound to the same level of responsibility of the controller. So that is in terms of 21. So if there is a data breach, then in terms of 22, which you will see here, there is a compulsory reporting to the information regulator. In other words, you don't only compulsorily report yourself to the regulator, but you must also notify the data subjects. And in terms of the recent spate of data breaches, and I need to be careful how I answer this, the Office of the Regulator has really proactively, notwithstanding the fact that there is a grace period, we have proactively engaged with responsible parties that have self-reported, and we've actually assisted them in drafting notifications to data subjects, doing appropriate steps to curb the loss of data. So from a South African perspective, as much as we have a grace period, as early as 2018, we've had what we call our data breach registrar. You will not see it in public, obviously, so that the, should I say, the intellectual property and the reputations of those affected are not seen. We do reflect the numbers in our annual report, but we are not in the naming and shaming of people who've suffered breaches. But I mean, if you look at the next slide, there has been the well-publicized Experian one. I'm sure everyone knows about that one. I can't keep quiet. Apparently, information was in Switzerland, and the information was in our brothers in Russia as well, on a server there. So a real BRICS problem. There, the regulator had to deal with several regulators on a trans-border basis. We spoke to the regulators in Switzerland. And what was really interesting with that one was, because it was so public, the regulator had to show its teeth. Notwithstanding the fact that there is a grace period, the regulator could not be seen as just standing by and saying there's a grace period. So just going back to that question, the grace period is a period to get your house in order and not for you to continue breaching data protection principles.
Thank you very much for this, Sizwe. And actually, in the interest of time, I would like to now pass the mic to our fellows, and then I would ask you, both Sizwe and Claudio, if you could be so kind also to stay for our final debate, because I see that we are starting to receiving some questions from the audience, and there is also one for Sizwe on enforcement of POPIA. Now, as we are, so again, Sizwe, one more time, thank you very much for your time here, and I hope you will be able to stay with us until the end for the debate. Thank you very much, Sizwe. And now, speaking about South Africa, we have our CyberBRICS fellow and also RIA fellow, Senka Hadzic, who has already mentioned in our last webinar the increasing number of cyber attacks that South Africa is a target of lately. And many of these increased number of cyber attacks is also due to the, of course, the increased use of and increased connection of digital technologies that to which everyone is obliged now due to COVID-19. Now, Senka, the South African government has also released an official COVID-19 tracing app. We have seen also with Claudio that these applications are quite widespread around the world, although the effectiveness of the tool is not really proven and is discussed in many countries. So in South Africa, there has been a launch of this COVID-19 tracing app. How has this been presented by the government, and how was it received or assessed by the South African civil society?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Luca, for the introduction. Today I will speak about the contact tracing app that has been launched in South Africa in September. And the Department of Health points out that the app keeps the user's information entirely safe. It's a Bluetooth-based app, and it tracks the proximity of smartphone devices to one another, and also the time, like how long they have been in contact. It does not use the GPS functionality of a device, and it also does not track the user's location. And also important, the app is completely voluntary. Just in terms of data protection, because that's kind of today's webinar theme, with regards to contact tracing, there are two aspects to consider. The first one are the weaknesses at the point of detection, which the South African COVID Alert app deals pretty well with. It uses a secret SMS code that is sent to the individual that tests positive. And then that secret code has to be entered into the contact tracing app in order for the patient to tag himself as positive. And this type of system should prevent certain types of attacks, like clone device, for example. And then there are the weaknesses in stored identity data. There is a central database of COVID-19 positive patients containing their personal data, and it is stored at the Department of Health and is accessed by healthcare professionals. So in that sense, it might be susceptible to certain hacks that use social engineering or network attacks. Oh, sorry. And some recommendations regarding data protections that my colleagues at Research ICT Africa put together in a recent paper. So first, an external security audit should be regularly carried out on the central database to ensure that it is POPIA compliant, and the sensitive data is only used for its original intended purpose, is anonymized for research, or deleted once the pandemic is over. And then second, when choosing a protocol for providing test results to multiple applications without revealing personal information, POPIA could be used as a guiding principle. Another issue with contact tracing that I'd like to mention is that of digital divide. In countries like South Africa with high income inequality and high unemployment, there's a certain risk of locking out and excluding a large section of the population from the contact tracing programs. And this exclusion would mostly affect the low-income portion of the population. The reason is that these automated contact tracing programs rely on owning a smartphone and having access to the internet, but in South Africa, both are limited. In fact, there hasn't been any demand science survey on phone ownership since the 2017 After Access survey, but some current estimates are that between 49 and 52% of the rural population and 63 to 69% of the urban population own a smartphone. So ideally, there would be a combination of multiple contact tracing regimes, both manual and automated. And ideally, both of them would have a underpinning theme of being privacy preserving.
Thank you very much for this, Senka. And actually, you raised a very interesting point that I would like to briefly discuss with Larissa Magalhães, our CyberBRICS fellow dealing with Brazilian digital policies. Larissa, we have seen very recently our friends at CETIC releasing some very insightful data on the use of internet services and applications during COVID, and how personal data may be used or are being used due to COVID-19. The pandemic not only obliges us to stay at home and increasingly use digital technologies, but also to reshape the way we use such technologies. So what are the insights from this recent data, and how is digitization in Brazil perceived, this increasing, very hasteful process? How is this perceived by users according to this latest study?
Okay, thank you, Luca. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here again. I want to just remember the last webinar where I talked about the function, about the national authority for the protection law and personal data protection law. It's like a major challenge, and it has a direct impact on enforcement. And I want to highlight the challenge for companies and citizens, just to remember. The companies, you need the guidance of data protection officer. So it's important to try to clarify for the knowledge of data and the risk measures, incident response, and managing the records. And about citizens, the most important, for me, it's the great challenge. It's trying building the data protection culture. So you need to try and create technology and engagement. However, there are a few relevant discussions about data protection, data personal protection and public service. Especially today, I try and explain the connection with the digital transformation in government and protection data, personal protection data. So you have 3 points important for discussion. It's about the survey in the TIC COVID panel. It's the survey for your presentation, some challenge and to adapt to data protection law in the government sector. And I will try and show some data from the research of the use of information and communication technology in Brazil, especially during the pandemic. And this survey, it's survey by the Internet Study Committee, or CETIC, at the Center for the Research and the Internet Community in Brazil. And the survey is about the use of the public online servers during the pandemic. It was assessed, and the survey is about the 3 issues very important. For our discussion, it's about the evolution of the online servers, public online servers, but to have questions about the telemedicine and privacy too. So I show the special graphic for us, just for comparative. And in this graphic, you can follow the numbers about the searching information and performer online servers. And you can see in the green bar, it indicates the use of the servers before the pandemic. And in the blue bar, you can show the volumes during the pandemic. So what's this important? It's obvious that there wasn't the crazy in online servers during the pandemic, because we are using their data and online servers more than before. But almost 60% to the respondents performed about the servers and using their data in online. However, the survey data show us that personnel see some risk, and they provide personal data in the online service for government or companies. So they are concerned with the shared data too. And I showed two other important questions. It's about the performance, the benefits and the risk, and when you're making personal data viable to companies or government. It's important you try and see almost 60% of the users have the fear to risk and making data viable. And it seems that the user does not trust too much data policy or the law effectiveness. And at the same time, another important information is the 17% don't have a good opinion about the risk and benefits. Maybe this confirms a trend of the low knowledge about the law and the rights and culture of the personal data preservation and protection. And my second graphic, it's important for you try and understand how have the user's assessment of the main risk for share the personal data. Yes, the result had another factors, but it's important just see two important points here. The first is about the bank fraud, is like the high test index, and it's usually the same during all the time, during the pandemic and all the time. But it's about the invasion of privacy. It's high as the fear of the salient data. So it seems like the user distrust or have like a lack of the knowledge about the risk, and try and put the companies in the same level of the government. And what is important? Finally, I want to just indicate the most strong information in the survey. It's 84% of the users when using the e-services made some kind of report about using data with without the permission, and both for the government and company. So furtherwise, this is indicate you have the kind of the users know about how use the rights or active for the nouns when you have when they feel like injured about the personal data protection. And what this good connection for understand what happened about the transformation, digital transformation servers in Brazil right now. With this research by the internet community, you can make some connection with the current states of the digital transformation government in Brazil. And I would like to highlight the government issues, some importance. In the recent months, the federal government have been created like a showcase of the servers and the portal gov.br. And the initiative called like a digital transformation. And I suggest that the government servers have like a unification initiative, but it's not give the necessary attention to general data protection law. I try and explain, just look for the information and data about the servers and federal agents for try and understand. During the pandemic, the government digitized like 300 new servers. Okay, but according to information for the digital secretariat, during the pandemic, every 2 days, we have 3 new servers were launched for all the agents. Of course, the service is good, and especially in the time for the pandemic. But however, again, it's not clear how our data it's being traded in this cyber portal. I gave one important example. The Digital Government Secretariat has realized like a guide for helping the agents, etc. But the guidance for each agents to create the term of the data privacy. And for the eyes, you have like a compliance with the laws, but this is depends of the adherence of the agents. So what it's important impression, my impression about all this, it's like a voluntary adherence. And there is not appear to be any government incentive or support to disseminate law, like enforcement among the agents. Mm-hmm. And finally, I believe this like the path can diminish confidence in regulatory policy. And if the government want to act like a service platform and offer like a benefit for the citizens, you need to be active with the transparency, etc. So it's just good point for think about the challenge for the data protection law and try and think how the public cyber players prepare for compliance of the law, and what's the most good way for the institution and legal citizens to create the digital government for environment and the citizens. And so I want to take the advance with my colleagues, especially the Claudio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larissa, and excellent to stress that the increased movement toward digitalization of public services, it's frequently also met with a little bit of mistrust from citizens. We actually have witnessed an example of this in Russia over the past weeks. There has been an increasing usage of data-intensive technology that are proposed not only as suitable solutions to solve or to mitigate the effect of the pandemic, but also increasingly utilized as tools to digitize also public security and public safety. There have been a lot of intense debates about, for instance, the use of face recognition to this extent, and there has been a very interesting case, a very interesting debate in Russia about face recognition over the past weeks. Anya Orlova, you are our specialist on Russian digital policies. Tell us, Anya, what's happening in Russia?
Hello, Luca. Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Just to confirm if you can hear me well, if my connection is working fine.
Yes, very well.
Yes, perfect. Yes, today I will talk about the use of the video surveillance system, specifically in the city of Moscow, the capital of Russia, together with another technology, which is called FacePay. This technology is used to recognize and to assist the payment for the use of the transportation system by the face recognition technology as well. So since September 1st, a video surveillance system has been put into operation at all the stations of the Moscow Metro. And according to the Department of Transport and Development of Road and Transport Infrastructure of the city of Moscow, it is supposed to monitor the congestion of the metro and specifically how many people are being in each carriage of the metro train. And then this information is transmitted to the city mobile applications for the users, so they can choose which carriages are not so jammed and actually plan their movement within the subway. And the next step, after this system was introduced on September 1st, this year. The next step was the development and the test of this FacePay technology, which implies that you pay for the travel by the scan of your face. So basically, when you enter in the subway station, there is a camera that scans your face, and together with the card, the identification card that you're carrying, the payment is processed. So, however, this testing of this face recognition system should enable the payment of the system of the FacePay in Moscow subway, and it also has started on the 1st of September, but not in all the Moscow subway, but just in some parts. And it was supposed to end, one part of the testing was supposed to end by October this year. And the Moscow authorities, the Moscow government is planning to equip 1,500 metro cars with this face recognition system, which worth almost 1.4 billion Russian rubles. And 8 cameras with the face recognition technology are planned for each carriage of the train. However, as you already mentioned, there's been a hot discussion about the security of the system, and some of the civil society organizations working on data protection and on privacy of the users have been running their own independent investigations, and what they've managed to find out so far is that there have been some drawbacks within the system. And the experts are now reporting that this system is still not protected from the leaks and from the unauthorized access. So basically what they managed to find out is that it's very easy to purchase the data about users of the Moscow subway system on the dark net. And the price is actually not very high. So, and there have been some investigations where some reporters managed to buy data about themselves. This information was already provided to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and to the Moscow Department of Information Technologies. And as there has not been sufficient response from these authorities, one of the leading Moscow Russian organizations on data protection and privacy, it's called Roskomsvoboda, they filed a lawsuit against the Ministry of Internal Affairs and demand to stop the operation of this face recognition system in Moscow until all the necessary and legal guarantees are provided to prevent the abuse of the users' data leaks. This video surveillance system, together with the FacePay technology for payments by face scan, is also planned to be installed in one part of the Moscow tram system, and to include 390 sets, and each set also will include 6 cameras. So the trend is that there is an extension of the surveillance system. And just to note that this technology, this video surveillance system, is just one of the 170 other parts of the surveillance system that is used by the by the Moscow government to control the movement of the transport within the city of Moscow and to monitor activities. But there are also reports that this system will be now implemented in some of the regions of Russia. This is the first.
Thank you very much for this, Anya. And actually, another point that emerged over the past weeks from Russia, and you announced us in our conversation, was the fact that actually the Ministry of Digital Development of the Russian Federation is also proposing to prohibit encryption protocols. And this is, of course, has raised some eyebrows in the civil society communities. So tell us more about this initiative. What's the proposal about?
Yes, okay. Yes, in September, the Russian Ministry of Digital Development, Communication and Mass Media proposed to prohibit encryption protocols that interfere with site blocking. So basically, there is a draft of a bill, and it proposes to ban cryptographic algorithms and encryption methods like TLS 1.3 with ESNI extension DOH, DOT, and these encryption methods they are enabled and implemented by such corporations like Google and Mozilla, and DOH technologies are being implemented to improve user security and users' privacy, again by companies like Microsoft, Google, and Mozilla. And these cryptographic TLS protocols, they provide secure data transmission between nodes of the internet, and they are using several types of encryption in the process of this information transfer. And in addition, the bill proposes to block sites that will be using these technologies. So obviously this bill has generated a lot of social media reaction, and specifically among the industry experts. And since the bill was open for public comments, for public debate, there's been already released some conclusions by the expert groups. So, for example, according to the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, this proposed bill was criticized. Specifically, these are amendments to one of the main laws on information that is constantly being updated. And the ban, according to these experts, the ban on the use in Russia of the modern encryption protocols, specifically that hides the name of the website, is tantamount of or equal to disconnecting from the global internet. And some of the main criticisms is that it appears that any encryption protocols that are used in all areas are suitable or apply under the definition of the bill. And the amendments in their current form formally lead to the fact that the use of the computers and smartphones will become illegal in Russia. And the operation of information systems will also be paralyzed by this bill. Also, another criticism is that the modernization or removal of cryptography from all the state information systems today will also entail significant budgetary costs. And for domestic internet companies in Russia, they will basically become deprived, or will be deprived of advantages, and will lose competitive opportunities in terms of export potential, and also in terms of payment systems, like banking payment systems. They will become vulnerable if all if the proposed bill will pass. And therefore, the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, it noted that the prohibition of these protocols threatens difficulties for Russian companies and also will play into the hands of the attackers. It will become much easier to commit cyber attacks or online attacks. Therefore, the discussion, or the undergoing public discussion, has just ended on October 5th. And we still need to see how this will evolve, but the government has already made a statement that they will consider the comments from the public and from the industry experts. So this is the current state.
Thank you very much, Anya, for this picture about the most recent evolution in Russia. Russia has not been, of course, the only country that has increased the pace of digitalization and collection of personal data. Of course, we have heard a lot from India and its plans to digitize public services. And only a couple of weeks ago, there was another announcement from Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the launch of the National Digital Health Mission, which aims at the digitalization of part, at least, of the healthcare system, with also the creation of a special health ID for Indian citizens. So Smriti, Parsheera, you are our specialist from India. How is this new health ID supposed to work? How is the National Digital Health Mission going to be conceived?
Hi, Luca. Hi, everyone. So, as you said, this is something which was announced in August, formally announced, although it's a project that's been in the works for the last 2-3 years. But I guess the pandemic has given it impetus and it's being rolled out formally now. So the idea of it is, as you mentioned, the idea is that there will be a health ID, which every individual will have. And that will become the basis through which all of their health information will be recorded and put together in a sense in one place, although it will be held in different repositories. So take it as your doctor visits, your prescriptions, your lab reports. Everything is, the vision is that all of this will be linked through one ID, so that there is portability at the user's end. If you go to a different hospital at another point of time, there is an ability with your consent for the next doctor to call for your records and your transaction history of any sort in the medical realm of things. So connected to the Aadhaar ID, which is our national digital ID we already have, there will be an ID which will be issued, which will be separate from that, a health ID. And the government has also indicated that for now, it could also be issued based on your phone number. So it need not be only through Aadhaar. So for now, they've said through one of these, you can get a digital ID. They've said it will be voluntary as of now. And it's one ID for an individual. There'll be similar IDs issued for the health practitioners, so for doctors and nurses, and similarly for health facilities, clinics and hospitals. And each of them will have an ID through which this seamless sort of transaction of information is supposed to take place. And the idea is to connect people who want to call for information and people who have this information with the consent of the user. And that's the broad plan of it. The government has put out a policy document for consultation, which has broadly the makings of what you would expect in a data protection law, but it's a policy document. And that's one of the worrying things of this whole proposal, that it's happening in the absence of a law. There is no specific law backing this, and there is no digital data protection law in the country as of now. So to have something which deals so extensively with personal data, sensitive personal data in that context without the backing of the law is something which has raised concerns. And also the fact that although it's being said right now that it's voluntary in nature, we've had this experience previously with our digital identity system, which also started as a voluntary project, but very soon creeped into becoming mandatory for many essential services. So if something like that were to happen in the health services sector, that would be problematic for many people.
Excellent, Smriti. Very interesting to hear about these policy initiatives. But actually, what is very interesting about the latest development in India is that India is also trying to be a pioneer in technical tools and architectures in order to shape data protection. So besides all these policy efforts, including the major effort of elaborating a new data protection law, India is also trying to experiment with the data empowerment and protection architecture, which is a new initiative that aims at creating a new category, completely new category of intermediaries that will help manage consent for data subjects. What is this initiative about, and how it is this implemented or presented by the Indian government?
Right. Yeah, that's true. What this whole DEPA architecture, the data protection and empowerment architecture, is about. It's actually interesting. The genesis of it is from a private sector entity coming up with the whole proposal and architecture, and now it's being championed quite aggressively and seriously by the government in multiple sectors. They've recently put out a policy document explaining the architecture and seeking comments. Broadly, what it does is that we know that in most data protection regimes, including the one which is being proposed in India, consent is the basis for processing, is one of the key bases for processing. But consent is broken in many ways and for many reasons. And one of them is this fact that, people are consenting to too many things, or sometimes you take a blanket approval to share information, but without the consumer knowing that, at each point of time, this is where my data is going and in this manner. So this is meant to be an architecture to address that problem. where a technical solution has been devised, where something called the consent artifact has been developed, which is basically a technological artifact which consists of information like who's the sender, who's the receiver, at what time was this information requested, for what purpose, and all of this is how consent has to technically be taken. And this will be facilitated through this new body of intermediaries, which are being called consent managers. So since we were discussing the health sector, I'll just take a brief example from that. So, at one side of this are people who have the health information of an individual, which is, say, your hospital. At the other side is people who want to be users of this information, say a health insurance company, right? Typically today, what could happen is that these two entities speak directly to each other, and the consumer is in the blind or is sort of given a blanket consent for this. This architecture is trying to replace that by building a layer of consent managers in the middle who will coordinate with the consumer and will facilitate this transaction while themselves remaining blind to the data. So data will be encrypted, will be transferred between, through the manager, but the manager itself will not have access to that data. And it's novel, it's an interesting technological solution, but of course we need to bear in mind that consent has many problems. This management part of it is one problem, but of course there is the behavioral part of it, the fact that we have too much to consent for. This consent fatigue, we're just looking at narrow immediate goals in mind, and there are all these behavioral aspects which are not going to be addressed just by having a new technology to do this, but it will address the fact that there will be logs of all the consent which has been given. So subsequently, if it's found that unfair consent was taken, or it was taken in the wrong manner, then you can hold people accountable. So it will have that in the architecture.
Fascinating, this initiative from India, and I totally agree with your consideration about the complexity of consent as a tool, a proper tool to address data protection. Of course, it was conceived as a tool to protect individuals with meaningful notice about what will happen with their data, but then it evolved into a sort of nemesis of the original idea, actually a way of paying for services with data and without knowing anything about what use will be implemented of data. Of course, this is precisely why strong data protection regulation is needed, and strong enforcement also is needed. India has been doing a lot about, at least has tried to convene a lot of discussions and try to utilize feedback in the draft of new policies, but also China has been very much in the headlines for its data protection policy efforts lately. We've learned only this week that there is a new draft data protection law in China. Wang, you are our, together with Aaron Martin, you are our China specialist directly from Hong Kong. Wei, tell us more about this new milestone for China, this draft Chinese personal data protection law.
Okay, thanks, Luca. Hello, everyone. My name is Wang. I'm a PhD student from University of Hong Kong. I'm very happy to share with you about the draft of the Chinese Personal Data Protection Law, also known as CPDP in China. Sorry. It was introduced or reviewed several days ago, and it is now under review of China's National People's Congress. And the draft consists of 8 chapters and 70 articles. In the first place, there are some special sections set up to restrict the processing of sensitive personal data, and it's I think it's a very timely response to the COVID-19. It says sensitive personal data can only be processed if there is a specific purpose and a sufficient necessity, and the individual's separate or written consent should be obtained. It is emphasized that personal data should be handled in legal and legitimate way with a clear and a reasonable purpose, limited to the maximum scope to achieve the purpose, publicizing processing rules, ensuring the accuracy of data, taking security measures. And also the draft has introduced the informed consent mechanism. Particularly, there is a special section on the rules governing the handling of personal data by state organizations. And this section will actually limit the public authority, the power of public authority. Secondly, the draft, there is an article which endows CPCD with necessarily extraterritorial effects. The fact stipulates that this law shall also apply to personal data processing activities that take place outside China for the purpose of providing products or services to domestic natural persons, or for analyzing and evaluating the behavior of domestic natural persons. And it also requires overseas personal data processors to set up special agencies or representative in China to be responsible for personal data protection related matters. And thirdly, it has achieved more, much stricter requirements on the informed consent of cross-border data flow. Particularly in this section, the informed consent mechanism has also been emphasized in this scenario of data cross-border flow. And finally, in compliance with the newly introduced Civil Code of China, the draft also defines, it clarifies the rights and obligation of the relevant data subjects. It defines the rights of, for example, the right to access, the right to decision, the right to correction, and the right to deletion. Actually, this structure is very similar to that of GDPR. And finally, there is a big step. This CPCD has also requires personal data processors to establish an appealing mechanism to exercise their rights, probably to the National Administration for Cyberspace. Okay, this is a very brief, brief introduction. I hope it works.
Excellent, wonderful introduction. And we will make sure we will discuss the Chinese data protection law also at our CPDP session. CPDP is another acronym, not only the Chinese personal data protection law, but also the Computer Privacy and Data Protection Conference that will take place in January online. We will have a session dedicated to data protection in the BRICS, and then we will host the CPDP LATAM edition in Rio de Janeiro in July next week, where there will be also a BRICS data protection summit, and I'm sure this will feature amongst the key discussions topics of the upcoming sessions and conferences. Now, last but not least, of course, I would like to ask to Aaron Martin to provide us a little bit of follow-up from one of the most interesting topics of our first CyberBRICS webinar, the very recent Chinese project for a new digital currency, the digital renminbi, that has been not only announced, is already implemented on several pilots in major cities in China, but has been met with some interesting regulatory responses. So Aaron, what can you tell us about this?
Thank you, Luca. Can you see my screen and the slides?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. I mean, it's not much text, but the images sometimes are nice additions. So as we all know, the rising cashless payments since the lockdown started in response to the pandemic is accelerating how technology is being used, in particular for payments and the use of money, which is bringing greater attention to the different digital currency initiatives that are being proposed across the world. As Luca mentioned in last month's webinar, we discussed China's project. So China is currently piloting and scaling up its central bank-led digital currency project, which is commonly referred to as the digital renminbi. And this has generated a lot of excitement in different corners of the world. Now, China's movement in the space has created intense interest among central banks, in particular the US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of Japan, among others. And it would appear that many of these central banks are kind of fearful about falling behind China's efforts in its development of its digital currency. The response to China's digital renminbi is certainly worth tracking. And as part of that tracking effort, earlier this month, there was a white paper that was published by the Bank of International Settlements. It's an international sort of regulatory body based on a collaboration among 7 central banks, including those that I mentioned. The title of the white paper is Central Bank Digital Currencies, Foundational Principles and Core Features. It's interesting because despite sort of China's leading in this space, the white paper doesn't mention China once or its currency. So it's a sort of notable absence in the otherwise thought-provoking white paper. Now, in this white paper, the bank state sort of the core features for future digital currency initiatives should include things like resilience, availability at low or no costs, appropriate standards and clear legal frameworks, as well as an appropriate role for the private sector. So just wanted to flag this as something interesting that's come up since our last webinar and last discussion on this. We'll keep tracking how the currency in China develops and as well the international sort of response among regulators and others, which no doubt will be super interesting.
Thank you very much for this, Aaron. Actually, a very last issue that I wanted to discuss before we open for discussion and for questions from the public. Now, we have seen also that the current pandemic has highlighted our really strong and deep dependence and reliance on an inclusive and hopefully ubiquitous digital infrastructure, right? Well, the use of this digital infrastructure has been key in the Chinese response to COVID-19, for instance, in the latest effort of digitalization. But it has also highlighted some very serious gaps, both in access to infrastructure, but also at social level. So how is China addressing these type of gaps?
Thank you, Luca. It's a great question. So as we all know, digital access is one of the core focus areas of the CyberBRICS project. And this is a very interesting sort of story and sort of news item from China about some of the sort of exclusion, unintentional exclusion that comes from a digital response to the pandemic. So the pandemic's only increased China's reliance on mobile devices, and that forces a lot of older people to get familiar with technology that previously they may not have been very comfortable with. But the fact remains that a large portion of China's elderly population is still offline and unconnected. And despite the country's incredible growth in internet adoption, many elderly people in China are still not online. So this leaves a lot of people unable to get the digital health codes that have become as an essential part of life in China during the pandemic. So in this context, life without a smartphone is indeed a quite difficult task. Now, if you guys aren't familiar, the codes are supposed to indicate the chance that someone's come in contact with the virus by using a combination of self-reported personal information and big data, as well as geolocation data from telecommunications providers and other information from government agencies. A green code means a person's able to move freely, but a yellow or red code means a person should quarantine for either a week or 2 weeks respectively. But being without a smartphone causes many problems for people trying to get home, for example, or to use public transport, who are often turned away because they can't show the required digital health code. Now, one railway station in eastern China, in a town called Wuxi, is trying to help out with this lack of access among a certain segment of the population. So they estimate that about 1 in 8 passengers who pass through the railway station either don't have a smartphone, use a feature phone, i.e. a phone that isn't capable of featuring apps, or don't have the popular smartphone app WeChat on their phones, which becomes a barrier to using the digital health code. So that's about 2,000 people every day who face challenges in their pursuit to travel and move around. So they've created a new help desk where both staff and volunteers help people either sign up for the health codes where their device is permitted, or to get a paper pass if they don't have a smartphone. Now, of course, whether the codes like the digital health code in China or elsewhere are effective at preventing the spread of the virus is still very much a subject of debate. But for people who need them to move around, these mitigation efforts, I think, can be quite helpful in making life easier for people. So to close, it's encouraging that authorities at a local level are finding ways to address the needs of unconnected people, disconnected people. And one can only hope that these initiatives spread out both within China and globally. Thank you, Luca.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aaron. And actually, in the last couple of minutes that we have before we need to say goodbye to our audience, I wanted to share a couple of questions. We have received a few questions from the audience. Now, there are a couple that are really targeted to Brazil. So the first one is, considering the latest digital policies adopted by the Brazilian government, do you think that Brazilian citizens are right to fear or to mistrust digital public services? And what measures could the government adopt to generate or to enhance trust among users? Maybe, Claudio, would you like to start giving your 2 cents about this?
Definitely.
2 reals.
Definitely, Luca. I've been addressing this issue for some months now since the COVID, and I think that's a sentence that works a lot. I think this is something that should occupy but not preoccupy us. And it's not something to fear. We're dealing here with, the issue is very clear in the question. The issue is trust. Trust is not an action. Trust is a process. So it does not happen overnight. There is no one single measure that we take from the government perspective or from the infrastructure or from the industry that will solve the issue of trust. So how do we solve an issue of trust? First thing, we have to have a hub where to discuss these things in the country. And a hub is the regulator that should have been in place right now, that guides this with the credibility, with the goodwill, with the necessary educational drive that should be in the beginning of the first actions. As you see, the measures like the one Sizwe describes that integrate, that make the regulator a relevant player in the scenario of data protection field in the country are decisive to draw that line. So I think yes, it is a problem, but we should not worry. It should make us busy in working, designing solutions together. There's no way we can solve an issue of a process with a single act.
Thank you very much for your thoughts about this. We had another question regarding Popia directly to Sizwe, but he just wrote me a couple of minutes ago that he had to leave because he had another commitment. So knowing that we are almost 15 minutes out of time and that we had very, very interesting presentations today, I would like to close this webinar right here today, not to steal any further precious minutes to our distinguished speakers and to our audience. So let me thank you very much once again, especially our guest speakers. This has been an incredibly interesting webinar. We will release soon the next topic for the next CyberBRICS webinar in November. Stay tuned, and thank you very much, everyone, for your excellent and provoking ideas and presentations. Thank you very much.